Hey everybody! Before I start this episode, I have some really exciting news to tell you. My friend Rhiannon and I have started a brand new podcast. It's called Gilmore Girls, and every week we're going to be discussing all spooky topics, including Halloween, ghost stories, and our favorite horror movies and TV shows. Of course, we'll also be discussing true crime topics, so go check it out right now. The first episode is already out and ready for you to listen. Just search Gilmore Girls, Gilmore being one word, wherever you listen to your podcast, and you can find us on social media by searching for the same name. I hope you enjoy it, and now back to the episode. Her life had been full of consistent lows and highs that had led her to this point. After suffering the loss of one life, the birth of another, unlikely new friends, and a recent pit of despair, she was trying to do the right thing and get her life back on track. However, that is always easier said than done. Getting out of the hole she was in felt harder than when she actually fell into it, and the temptation was always there waiting for her. Instead of getting the help that she desperately needed, she made a last-minute detour that would alter her future. Today, we're discussing a tragic case that brings a popular phrase to life: be careful of the company you keep. However, this is a case that can be solved with the public's help and attention. On May 6th of 2016, Chelsea Cobo became one of the missing. Chelsea was born in November of 1993, and her childhood circumstances were less than ideal. Her mom and her dad both suffered from mental illness, and although they loved her, they knew that they couldn't raise her properly in the way that she deserved. When she was only 13 months old, she was adopted by her Aunt Rose Cobo, and she would stay with Rose for the rest of her life. Although Rose is her biological aunt, I will refer to her as Chelsea's mom throughout this episode, because she most definitely was. Based on her social media, Chelsea was a very outgoing girl growing up in Brooklyn, New York. It seems like she had a lot of friends and loved to go out with them. She loved listening to music and was always promoting events by local DJs and attending music festivals. Chelsea's mom refers to her as a homebody that didn't go out much, but I think she was really a little of both. I actually have a friend like this that bounces back and forth between wanting to be social and wanting to stay home by herself. When she goes out, my friend is the absolute life of the party and makes a multitude of friends so naturally. But once that's over, she wants to stay reclusive at home and not go anywhere for a long time. Chelsea started a relationship with a man in 2014, and they seemed very happy together, but they would eventually break up. In 2015, Chelsea actually gave birth to a beautiful baby boy and began to raise him as a single mom. At this point in her life, her social outings seemed to slow down. Instead of posting pictures at the club or at music festivals, Chelsea was posting pictures of painting Easter eggs with her son, and adorable pictures of him wrapped up in a towel after bath time. Becoming a mother made her want to spend all of her time at home with him, and she tried to be the best mother she could be to her son. Although she had a very close relationship to her mother Rose, Chelsea also continued to have a relationship with her birth parents. In March of 2016, her biological mother unfortunately passed away from kidney failure, and Chelsea was completely distraught over her death. She began to experience serious episodes of depression, and she really wanted help for these problems. Sometimes it can take the major event of someone passing away to trigger mental health issues in a person's life. Personally, this also happened in my life. I don't even remember having anxiety or depression in my childhood until I was 16 when my grandmother passed away. And since then, all of these years later, I still battle daily with my mental health. So I really relate to Chelsea in this way. Fortunately, Chelsea was very open with Rose about wanting to seek help for her mental health, and she checked herself into the Coney Island Hospital for treatment. Reports really differ in Chelsea's case depending on where you read the information, but from what I can gather, Chelsea was diagnosed with bipolar depression, borderline personality disorder, and possible postpartum depression. This makes a lot of sense because Chelsea was dealing with so much at one time. She had a 10-month-old son, and her mother had just passed away, so that is a lot of life change for anyone to deal with. Chelsea spent 2 weeks in this hospital and became good friends with her roommate named Sabrine. This roommate also had a frequent male visitor named Justice. I never saw anything in my research about the relationship between Sabrine and Justice, but I assumed from my reading that the two of them were probably in some kind of romantic relationship. Regardless, Chelsea became friends with both of them, and she was discharged from the hospital on April 15th. After being released, Chelsea continued to communicate and spend time with Sabrine and Justice. The timeline in Chelsea's case escalated very quickly at this point between April and May. Rose said that once Chelsea was released from the hospital and met these people, she seemed to be a completely different person. She says that Chelsea had been very introverted up until that point, but had started going out with these new friends all the time. On April 25th, Chelsea went out for the night with Sabrine and Justice, and she didn't come back until the early morning hours of the 26th. When she came home, Rose knew immediately that something was wrong. Chelsea seemed very disoriented and appeared to be highly intoxicated. Rose was very concerned, especially when she noticed that Chelsea had fresh bruises all over her arms, so she quickly drove Chelsea to the hospital for an examination. This is another factor in the case where I have seen mixed information. Most of the sources I have read state that Chelsea had a rape kit and drug test performed, and it came back that Chelsea had been drugged with opioids, robbed, and sexually assaulted. Other reports I have seen say that a rape kit wasn't performed. However, based on the information that can be confirmed in this case, I do believe that a rape kit would have been conducted based on her bruises. The next day, Chelsea told Rose that she couldn't remember anything from that night, except that Justice and Sabrine had given her something that made her black out. I couldn't find any information on the background of Justice, but Sabrine had a lengthy arrest record, including drug dealing, shoplifting, and sex work. On May 6th, Chelsea asked Rose to check her into a rehab for her continued drug use. It's unclear whether Chelsea had been using drugs prior to the night of her attack on April 25th, but I do think it's very possible that she started using drugs after meeting Sabrine and Justice, and an addiction might have started before the 25th. Regardless, Rose took Chelsea to the Lutheran Medical Center in Sunset Park, New York. From that hospital, Chelsea was supposed to be transported to St. John's Riverside in Yonkers, which is about an hour and a half away. Later phone records would show that Chelsea was in contact with Justice and Sabrine while being transported between these facilities at 10:30 a.m., and she was asking them to get her drugs. Although there is proof that Chelsea was transported to St. John's, she never actually checked in. A lot of you may find this strange. You may be questioning why Chelsea would start the process of going to a rehab if she was just going to change her mind and back out at the last minute. However, if you have a loved one with a drug addiction, you may understand. I personally know and love an addict who did something very similar. She had struggled with addiction for years and really wanted to get help, but once she arrived at the rehab, she left 2 hours later. I'll admit that I had a really hard time understanding her and the decisions that she made because of her addiction, but I eventually realized that you just never understand their decisions until you are addicted to a substance. Many addicts constantly want to get help and get better, but once they are actually faced with a treatment program, the thought of getting better can be terrifying. Getting better means going through terrible withdrawals, which they've probably already experienced in the past, and living without the one thing that their brain and body has convinced them they need to survive. I think Chelsea had every intention of wanting and receiving treatment, but backed out and decided to go on a binge instead. Chelsea texted Rose that day and told her that she decided not to go to that rehab, but she told her that she was looking for a different rehab to go to. Meanwhile, she was in communication with Justice and Sabrine about getting drugs. Sabrine texted her, quote, "Listen, my boys got dope. Let's pick you up. We got everything," end quote. Justice picked her up sometime that day, and he actually told Rose that he picked her up, but he told her that he dropped Chelsea off on 68th Street in Sunset Park. Sabrine has continuously claimed that she did not go with Justin to pick Chelsea up that day, although her text makes it seem like she was with him when she said, "Let's pick you up." Rose reported Chelsea as missing after she hadn't heard from her and grew concerned. Police spoke around with Chelsea's friends and found out which one had spotted her last. A friend reported seeing Chelsea at the Floridita restaurant in Sunset Park around 11:45 p.m. on May 7th. This restaurant is on the corner of 46th and 5th Avenue in Brooklyn. The police believed that the sighting was really credible because Chelsea went to this restaurant a lot. Employees said she always sat at a corner table talking to a DJ named Antonio. I've also seen the name Anthony used for this person, and both of them are really used equally, so I can't say which one is more accurate. Like I've said, the information on this case is very hard to decipher, and the police haven't came out with much of their own investigation. However, Antonio and Justice knew each other, and it's been speculated that Antonio is the supplier for Justice and Sabrine's drugs. This is really where the information in Chelsea's case ends. She is still missing, but she is considered too old to be defined as a runaway. Rose believes that Chelsea is alive and being held against her will somewhere. Others believe that Justice and Sabrine murdered Chelsea, and others believe that Justice really did drop Chelsea off and hasn't seen her since. Because the information is so up in the air on this case, I think any of these theories are possible. However, this case screams sex trafficking to me. I don't normally say that, but all of the signs of human trafficking are evident in this case. Sex trafficking has been discussed a lot lately, and although most of the talk has involved conspiracies and celebrities or politicians, I want to bring this topic down to a statistical and factual discussion. According to the FBI, human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal business, and it's already the third largest crime enterprise in the world. Sex trafficking rings are ran predominantly by men, but women are also involved in the operation. In many instances, these women are tricked and manipulated through drugs and control. For example, a woman who may already be addicted to drugs might meet a man that she doesn't know is a pimp. He can supply her with the drugs that she needs for seemingly free, but then he can start making her sleep with people in order to get the drugs that she's addicted to. Other times, they might drug them enough to make them disoriented, and then let multiple people rape them. Pimps often have a woman they refer to as the bottom, who is their most trusted woman, and these women work as recruiters to find new girls for the pimp. Many women involved in sex work may seem like they're doing it freely, but this is often a form of Stockholm Syndrome. They become reliant on their pimp for their drugs or a place to stay, and sometimes they even believe that this person cares for them. Once you are addicted to a substance, you will do anything possible to get a little bit more of it. Your main goal is how you will score your next high, and nothing else matters. In Chelsea's case, we know that Sabrine already had a history of sex work and drug use when the two of them met. We also know that Justice would visit Sabrine in the hospital, and Chelsea's drug problems started after meeting the two of them. In my opinion, I believe that Sabrine and Justice introduced Chelsea to drugs. On the night that she was drugged, I believe that they took advantage of Chelsea and maybe allowed others to do the same, especially when you take into account the bruises that Chelsea had on her when she returned home. I also believe that the man Antonio that Chelsea had been seen with at Floridita may be the pimp. Sabrine and Justice may have just been recruiters for him. Of course, this is all speculation and just my thoughts on the case. I feel like a lot of detailed information is missing in this case, and this is just my theory on where she may be. I do believe that Chelsea is alive and staying in this situation because she's being supplied with the drugs that she's addicted to. Brooklyn is the second most populated city in the country, with over 2.6 million residents. Especially after being addicted to drugs for so long, Chelsea may be on the streets without anyone being able to identify her. I think the answers in this case lie with Justice, Sabrine, and Antonio. and I'm hopeful that Chelsea will be found. I truly hope that she is rescued out of this situation and recovers from